Continuing with California private eye fiction, and why not? There's always more. Talking about a writer who did not achieve the same level of commercial recognition as Dashiell Hammett, Raymond Chandler, or Ross MacDonald, but who was a successful commercial writer and who I really enjoy. I'm talking about Joe Gores. Joe Gores was a private eye writer who was able to write, had an asset as a private eye writer that almost none have, which is he had been a private eye. And not just for like a couple years like Dashiell Hammett. Joe Gores had been a private eye for 10 years for a firm in San Francisco. And Gores was, like, he told the story, it was like an unlikely hire. The guy who hired him found out he went to college and thought that would kind of tell against him, that he wouldn't be able to sort of stick it out. But he did, and put in a lot of years on the job actually doing private eye work. And because of that, when he came to write about the private eye experience, he was able to bring a level of just kind of realism and down-to-earthism, perhaps, that I don't think anyone else has quite... I've never run across anyone who has the same level as that. Hammett had been a private eye, but Hammett did not have... There was no market in the 20s and 30s for realistic detective fiction, not really. So even though Hammett was able to write out of his experience, still the events in his books tend to be fairly, crazy and implausible. And by the time Gores came around, though, there was a market for fairly realistic detective stories, and so he was able to find a way in. Although he did his share of crazy stuff, but the heart of the Joe Gores books are what are called the DKA files. DKA being the name of the detective agency, Daniel Kearney Associates, which is based off the real agency that Gores worked for. And he did, I think, 6 or 7 books in the DKA files. He did a few others outside of it, which are fine. But I think it's the DKA files that will remain his distinctive contribution to the field. He also wrote a novel about Dashiell Hammett, one of those what if a fiction writer actually was involved in events similar to their fiction kind of books. And that one came out pretty well, and he became obviously as a private eye writer in San Francisco, he wound up having to know a lot about Hammett, and he liked Hammett a lot, and he wound up writing, right before he died, he wrote a official prequel to The Maltese Falcon. He got permission from the Hammett estate to do that, which I don't think they'd ever given anybody, called Spade and Archer, and it's about Sam Spade arriving in San Francisco as a young man and sort of building up until he is the Sam Spade at the start of The Maltese Falcon. That one came out very well. If you're a fan of The Maltese Falcon, go ahead and check it out. It's as close as you're going to get to a Dashiell Hammett style sequel. It's written in Hammett style. It takes advantage of the time and place of 1920 San Francisco. Gores did his homework. It's like a series of episodes in Spade's life that show him changing and maturing into the kind of the hard-bitten character who we meet at the start of Maltese Falcon. Okay, back to the DKA files. There's a couple things that make them special in the world of detective fiction. One, it's a group. It's a group of people. Although every now and then a particular investigator will take the lead, this is really one of those group hero stories, and I think the group is never really any less than 5, and sometimes more people who work at the agency, but at least 5. There's Daniel Kearney, who's like the head of the agency, and then there's like his his kind of stable of detectives and assistants who do the actual work on the cases, and they share the work. It doesn't each book involves multiple people either working on multiple cases or combining their forces to work on like one larger case. That right there takes the DKA files out of um, the typical detective story territory, because we have plenty of detectives where it's like a team of two, and more often a solo, kind of like Philip Marlowe, but a whole group working together, dealing also with their regular lives, because this is a job, so it's not like they're just going to drop everything and wander around the city all night. They got to sleep, they got other things going on, they got families and kids, so it's much more grounded in the real world and things happening more at the pace of the real world than when you have these sort of like unlikely isolated heroes who, once they're working on a case, that's all they're doing, which is typical structure of the novels. And the other is, of course, because of Gore's background, the cases, even though they are important and have stakes, they are grounded in deep realism. So when a case emerges that seems to call for something more difficult, DKA is always concerned with paying the bills. It's a business. Like they need to stay in business, and they can't send a guy off to investigate a whole bunch of stuff out in Louisiana unless it's really going to pay off somehow. Often concerns about simply paying salary certainly absorb the attention of the senior guy, Daniel Kearney, and the other detectives are very concerned about trying to get their receipts reimbursed, or just not like run their cars into the ground. They're very concerned about the day to day, and Gores is familiar with the jargon. He's familiar with the actual day to day work of these sorts of things. A lot of what DKA does, in my memory anyway, is like auto repo. They go and find cars that have been repossessed by banks and dealerships, and they take possession of them, which is probably something that private eyes do really do. And because of that, they develop a great memory of like, they just know the world of like American cars. They know where the dealers are. They know details about license plates and registration, because they need to know so that they can outwit people who might be trying to keep their stuff away from them. They do investigate important, sort of more typical cases, sometimes stuff that they sort of flopped into by investigating something much more simple and trivial. They pull on a thread and they find it's connected to this like larger conspiracy or what have you. They do work together, to various degrees. Everyone pretty much trusts the main guy, Daniel Kearney, and he's, fairly reliable guy, and but they don't like automatically always get along with each other. The people in their lives don't always have the best opinion of their work, which I'm sure is also true. Like Private Eye probably sounds cool, but then when you get down to it, it's like, what are you doing? Well, I'm spending 6 hours today making tons of phone calls trying to track down this one guy who's needed, in a civil suit. I mean, it just sounds, boring, honestly. There's a fair degree of like just the kind of the tedium of the job, which makes it, when they catch somebody or something that they're looking for, you feel that kind of surge of real like, oh, at least we got one, at least we got this. So there are 4 or 5 of these novels. I think the first one came along in about 1970, and then rolling into the 80s. Gores got pulled into TV and movie writing in the 80s. He wrote for some of the big crime shows of the 80s, like Hunter, I believe, or Magnum PI. And then, and this is the build-up, then in the early 90s, he went back to the DKA files and produced a comedy classic called 32 Cadillacs. 32 Cadillacs is one of the best detective stories ever read, and it takes the DKA stuff and it just brings it all together real nice. By this point, Gores is a very professional writer, and he really knows how to balance the length of his scenes. He reminds me deeply in this one of the mature Donald Westlake, which is not an accident because they were friends, and they even let each other use their characters from time to time. I think that happened in 32 they're just a little cameo, and like if you knew both authors you'd recognize it, but otherwise would just fly right by. Um, they it has that vibe of like fast moving stuff, the human comedy, using crime as a way to like get to know a lot of little characters quickly and enjoy their quirks, and then we're on to the next thing. So in 32 Cadillacs, Gores thought of this lovely plot where a guy is retiring as the king of the gypsies, which is, you know, a title he may or may not really be entitled to, but he has said that he will like pass his title on to whoever brings him this pink Cadillac. He wants this pink Cadillac that he had briefly back when he and his wife were young, and he wants to give it to her. And you know, whoever brings him this pink Cadillac. So all the people who want to be king of the gypsies are like out there stealing cars to bring to this guy in tribute. Like the entire American Roma community is going to like meet for this guy's retirement party and find out who's going to be the next king of the gypsies. It's hilarious. It's not insulting. I know the word gypsy can be seen as culturally insensitive, but Gores goes out of his way to show that he understands and respects Roma people and Roma culture as a real thing and not just as some flat comedic trope. And he clearly put in his time, you know, probably meeting real people and asking them about these things. Anyway, that's the mega plot. The part of the plot that concerns us is this one guy who really wants to be king of the gypsies works up a very elaborate plan to steal 32 Cadillacs from all around the Bay Area in a single day. And it works. It doesn't spoil anything because it's not the heart of it. The heart of the book is getting them back. So he gets away with all these Cadillacs. And then DKA is hired by the insurer. All the dealers have like this insurer who's on the hook for all this crap, and they want their cars back. So they go to DKA and say, save us from these horrible insurance fate. And so they go off, and the entire team really gets in the game, chasing leads, trying to track down these Cadillacs, trying to figure out ways to scam them back from the scammers. It's so much fun. Gores thought of so many good little sequences where somebody could like steal a car from somebody else, or steal it back, or steal it but then lose it and then have to track it down again. It's just a hoot. It has like the wild manic energy of like one of those like It's a Mad World, one of those giant 60s comedic epics like The Great Race, where there's so many moving pieces, and he keeps it all in order, and he builds it all up to the big climax at the retirement party, and you know, the characters get to know each other, and there's little touches, but it's just a lovely comedic romp. And to find that tucked into the best realistic Private Eye series that I know of is extremely fun for me. That all of the realism and all the effort put in developing this series, it's like in this book it all gets cashed in for the sake of pure fun. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate Gores taking the time to write that one for us, and I recommend it highly. You don't need to read the other DKA Files books beforehand to enjoy it. It couldn't hurt, but you can just jump right in. And I wish that this kind of crime comedy, this like, you know, caper, like giant non-violent crimes as a kind of like trope for adventure and wackiness, I wish this was more common. I wish that I could think of a lot more writers who engaged at it instead of just a few like Gores and Westlake and so on. Joe Gores.